Welcome back to Still Mormon. I'm Jeremy, your host. And last week got a pretty big reaction. Wow, it was really kind of fun to watch the good, which mostly the good reaction, some of the bad, some of the ugly, and field a ton of questions. And wow, I feel like I kind of dropped a bomb on people, and I just wanted to do a very quick video, announce some things, and then come back and today actually drop a bit of a bigger bomb on you. And I'm excited to do that. And today's going to be really fun. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to bring on some friends of mine, a good doctor friend of mine who's going to explain a few things. And also some of you who are fans of the show and who are fans of what we do here and what those of us who are in this camp do. I have a special couple guests coming up that you're not gonna want to miss. So stay tuned, because you haven't heard from them, at least on this show, ever, and you haven't maybe heard from them in a while. So I'm excited to bring them on. But before I announce what I want to announce, I want to share with you my philosophy regarding this work. I was having a conversation with a historian, and I said, we were talking about interpretation and kind of the right to interpret things based on the work that you do, and et cetera. And I made the comment, I said, I really believe in democratizing history, helping the people have full access to all the information, and then kind of showing how the sausage is made, how these interpretations get to where they are, what sources go into the interpretations, and how it is that groups of historians and individual historians come to these conclusions. Because ultimately, E.H. Carr, the famous historian E.H. Carr, that wrote the book, What is History? He says very clearly, history is interpretation. It's just interpretation. It's how we interpret these documents. And are we doing so in a reasonable way? Well, I said, I believe in democratizing history. And I think what's happened in the recent past of the internet and archive.org and all of the online archives and the LDS Church archives releasing so many things, and the JSP, especially the Wilford Woodruff diaries, and so many things that we have access to, and the great work that Don Bradley's done, and Brian Hales in releasing all those documents on MormonPolygamy.org. It's a wonderful time to be alive, to have access to information, because we, the people, the non-credentialed, we get to look at these things for ourselves. I just heard John Turner talk about on Ben Park's show. Wow, I really respect this. He said, you don't have to be a PhD historian to do historical research. He said, you just have to, have a good imagination and be able to draw connections. Thank you, Dr. Turner. I have great respect for him. I've spoken to him personally, and I really respect his perspective. And we don't agree on certain historical issues, and that's okay. But I really respect that point of view. So I believe in the democratization of history. And I hope it continues. I hope the Church History Library releases more and more stuff. Of the 2.1 million records they have, they've released about 800,000. That's good. It's a good start. There's a lot more things that could be released that I hope will be. Well, so to that end, I didn't make the announcement last week just to let you know that I have the journals, although, it was kind of a tease. I know. I just wanted to do it short and sweet and just kind of put it out there. But I made the announcement to let you know that you get to have the journals, because you should. This should have been done, I don't know, 100 years ago, 20 years ago, at least 30 years ago, at least. Especially, once you could email stuff around, you should have had access to this, because you should be able to read it. And so you're going to get to read it. And a little bit later in the show, I just had to have a mechanism to deliver it. And so I didn't have a website and everything. I didn't have any of that stuff. As you notice, I've kind of been fly by night with this podcast, and it's been sporadic how I've gotten things out. I only put out, in a 2-year period, I only put out, 9 episodes. And yet last week was the 10th. And I've got more to tell you about that. But it's taken me a while to get things together. I had some personal issues, and a lot of things that I have had to deal with in the last while. So I finally have a way to get these things to you, and you can have them, and you should have them. So I'm excited to announce that today, kind of Edward Snowden-like. Here you go, and have fun. And then before that, I want to answer your questions. I got a ton of questions, and so I want to answer those. And the first question I got, by the way, was, do you have the real journals? Do you have because, I put together a creative thumbnail. I mean, can you blame me? But no, I don't have the real journals. These are props. These are good props, actually. They're pretty good looking. And they're about this size, the real ones, close, about 4 by 6 roughly. And so they're fun props, but no, they're props. No, I don't have access to the actual physical journals. Only very few people have had that. I have a full typescript of the journals, and I'm going to talk to you about that because that was the next question. The next one being, well, how did you get them? So let's answer that now. And to do that, I want to bring on my good friend, McKay Platt, to tell how we got these journals, because I got them because he got them. So roll the tape.
Okay, so hi, McKay. Welcome.
Hi, how are you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing very well. So to my audience, this is McKay Platt. He is a good friend of mine. Temporarily was my doctor. He performed a very minor surgery on me. Well, maybe not so minor, but a surgery on me a while ago. And we have been friends for a very long time. And people have asked the question, how did I get the journals? Well, I got them from McKay. And he's here to tell us how he got them and why it is that he gave them to me. And but before that, how long have we been friends, McKay?
I think we met in 2018. A mutual friend introduced me to you and said something about my interest in history, and that's got us started.
Yep. Because about 20, I've always been interested in church history, but mostly church doctrine early on. And then somewhere after 2010, and especially toward 12 and 14, my interest in church history started to really peak. And then when we met, I had been knee deep in for 5-6 years, really diving into church history stuff, especially Mormon polygamy, when we met. And so we started, every time we would meet, long historical conversations would ensue. We'd email back and forth about various things, collaborating on ideas. And in fact, McKay, I have so much respect for him that he's actually helping to contribute to the second volume of the Clayton Conundrum, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But that's how we got introduced. And we had a really common interest in the subject of Mormon history, and that's over William Clayton. My interest in him started probably on 2015, and I started to dive into trying to figure out this Mormon enigma, because I think he's the Mormon enigma, not Emma. Emma's pretty straightforward, frankly. But William Clayton is so fascinating. I dove into him, but you also had a similar keen interest in him. How did that happen?
Well, in 2000, it could have been as early as 16, but definitely by 17, I was going through all of the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants and looking at what the Joseph Smith papers had said and where they came from, and why did Brigham Young include a lot of revelations, or let's say sections, in the Doctrine and Covenants that was produced in Utah in the 1870s, and why didn't Joseph include some of these things that were reportedly available to him, but he failed to include them in the 1844 Doctrine and Covenants. And of course, some of these were notes from William Clayton. Section 131 particularly got my interest. It says, in the celestial glory, there are 3 heavens or degrees. And for a man to obtain the highest, he must enter into this order of the priesthood. And that's what Clayton's journal said. And there are 2 things. Well, Brigham Young added a parenthetical, and that was meaning the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. He was saying that some order of the priesthood that a man must that a man must have or be into was required to be in the highest heaven. And in Brigham Young's mind, it was an order of marriage, meaning the new and everlasting covenant of marriage.
So that was not in Clayton's original.
No.
And not only that, but it's in Clayton's notes. It's not, or even I believe from his journal, or it's either that from his private book. But that was not something documented as Joseph having dictated. It was Clayton taking notes, so we have to trust that they're accurate.
Yep.
And then later, Brigham Young adds the new and everlasting covenant of marriage as a parenthetical to understand what the highest order of priesthood is.
Right. And that grabbed my attention partly because I'd written a paper called "The Lord Never Speaks in Parentheses." I'd learned that all the parentheticals in the New Testament were later additions and were not part of the original document.
Revelations, that's right.
And so I went through and tried to find anything in parentheses in our scripture that actually was original. And as I recall, I didn't find one thing. So I knew this was a later edition. That's the way they did footnotes.
Mm.
We would have done a footnote, but that's how they did it. They put a parenthetical in there. And so I had problems with that. But it interests me that if you think about all the journal writers in Nauvoo, how many of them have their journal entries in as scripture?
One person.
I can't think of anybody else.
One person, and he has 129, 130, and 131, and 132 is attributed to him.
And
Pretty
so
remarkable.
that's how I got my interest in William Clayton.
Okay. And likewise, because of this obscure little clerk that most people only know him because they see the lyricist note at the bottom of a couple hymns. That's how we know him mostly in the church. If somebody knows something about the Pioneer Track, they know about the Rhodometer or whatever and his trek across the plains. But because polygamy's hush in the conversations in gospel doctrine, we don't talk about that unless you're a deep diver into those things and you've read some of the books out there, which only a certain part of the population of Mormonism has read. Then William Clayton's kind of an anomaly to people. And so for the two of us, that's part of how we bonded, was over this obscure factory clerk from Penwortham, England. Thank you for that. Okay, so what I am mostly interested to hear you talk about is how in the world did you get the William Clayton journals? Because you got all of them.
Well, I was aware that that William Clayton's Nauvoo Journal, we had what had been leaked from Gerald and Sandra Tanner,
right?
When they stole Andrew Ehat's notes, and I was aware that James Allen had been one of the, I think there were only two men, there may have been others, who actually was able to go in there and see the whole journal, and he used that to produce his history of William Clayton. So when he came in as a patient, and I saw him professionally.
So he was your patient.
Yeah. And
how coincidental or providential that you have this fascination with Mormon history, and you then become the doctor of of one of the great historians of Mormon history.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to let that opportunity pass, and once we were done with our professional interactions, it always turned to Mormon history.
Oh boy.
Rarely to American history, but
so you became friends with him after he was no longer in your care.
Yes, we maintained a friendship for many, many years, possibly 20 years.
Wow.
And I first met him as a BYU student.
Okay. How long ago?
Well, I graduated in 79.
And this was the very time when he was transcribing the Clayton Journals. It was during that time period, the mid to late 70s, when he was doing that work.
Well, that must have been his interest, because teaching American history to BYU students was not his interest. In fact, I told him, the way you guys taught history at BYU was terrible.
You said that to him?
I did. I said, you stifled any interest in the subject by cramming 300 people into a gigantic auditorium and forcing them to watch this guy in a black and white TV monitor talk about American history. It was a terrible way to teach.
Wow. This was one of your first interactions with him. You mentioned this to him?
Yeah.
So you started out in a very forthright manner.
Yeah, I tend to be that way. Anyway,
one of the reasons I love McKay is because of his unusually blunt and wry sense of humor that I just adore. Anyway, go ahead.
He reminded me of that several times, but we got to the point where he knew we were going to talk about Mormon history every time he came in, and he loved doing it. And he became, he became a good friend. I enjoyed him. He enjoyed me. And I really believe he came in sometimes more to talk about history and to visit than any other thing, because, as you get into your late 80s and 90s, those kind of interactions where you used to be somebody and now you're a has-been. I mean, that's what happens when you retire.
Yeah.
And so I reminded him of how important he was as a historian, how much his work meant to me and others. And so he loved it, and I enjoyed it too.
I wish I could have met him, because I loved his biography on Clayton. It's just so detailed and so rich with information.
As an individual, he is kind, pleasant, thoughtful. I mean, he's just he's the kind of person we all ought to try and be.
Wow.
As a personality, he was great.
I got that from him just in his writing. Even he had a big spat with George D. Smith over the release of the Clayton Journals in McChronicle, and even so, it was still a kindly rebuke toward the use of what he called basically an irresponsible use of the out of context excerpts that have been released.
Yeah.
So okay, so you go and you meet with him for a number of years, and you're talking about history. I think you had mentioned to me something about how you would quiz him.
Yes. This is one of the things that some people are really annoyed by. I love quizzing people on things. It's just a way to engage them.
Yeah.
So at one point I said, let's see how well you knew Mormon history. The problem with Mormon
Wait a minute. You
is
said
no.
that to one of the deans of the Mormon history profession?
Right. I said one of the problems with Mormon historians is they only read Mormon sources. Now that's not that's not true, right? Joseph or Richard Lyman Bushman read all kinds of sources in his biography of Joseph Smith, but they shy away from our LDS stuff and Lyman White stuff. And so I said, all right, let's see how well you know Mormon history. What was the first temple built by an LDS apostle after Nauvoo? Well, that's easy. It was Manti. I said, no, it wasn't. It was built by Lyman White in Zodiac, Texas. And he had no idea about that history. Another time I said, he asked me for a quiz. It's like, hey, you quizzed me last night. Let's hear another one. I said, okay, who was the second prophet of the church? And he says, Brigham Young? I said, no, he wasn't. Hiram Smith was the second prophet of the church. Right. Oh, he corrected me. No, he was an associate president.
Yeah.
I said, no, he wasn't. Look at the original documents. That term was applied to Oliver Cowdery contemporaneously, and it was retrospectively applied to Hiram Smith, but contemporaneous documents are all signed by the president of the church or co-president with Joseph Smith.
Right. Yeah, and Joseph would get up, I think July 16th, 1843, and said, hey, this church needs to respect Hiram. They need to listen to Hiram. Why? Because he was the co-president. That's right. Exactly right. That's fun. So he flunked your quizzes.
At least those two. He did better on others.
Good. Very good. Oh man, you're making me jealous, because that kind of interaction I think is really unique and precious, and it's amazing that you were able to have that time with him.
Yes, I enjoyed him very much.
So, what how in the world did you get the journals from him?
Well, I asked for them.
Wait
I said, hey, could I get a copy of the William Clayton Nauvoo Journals? And his answer was, yeah, sure.
Just like that.
Yeah, come by my home and I'll give them to you. That's simple.
And I remember getting a call from you almost immediately, some point after that.
So
by the way, I had no idea. I don't think I knew that you were even friends with James Allen until you called me and you said, you won't believe what I just got.
So I went to his assisted living facility. He was in his 90s then, and confined to the facility. And I visited it with him for a while, and then he pulled out his laptop and sent me the PDF of the William Clayton Nauvoo Journals.
This is the first one he sent you. This is book 1, or journal A, 1842 to 43. This is exactly what he typed up and what he'd had on his computer that whole time. And he just sent it to you?
He just sent it to me. I asked, he said yes, and here it is.
And this is book 2, or journal B. It's got an addendum in the beginning, if you will. It's kind of like we call it the 9-page insert, something that was included with the journal, but then the whole thing. This is what I call the gap book. He sent you that. And then also this one, book C. By the way, audience, this is exactly what you're going to be getting today. This is what McKay passed to me, is what's being made available for download today. So this is the exact file that James Allen had on his computer all those years, and all of a sudden, his doctor friend, former doctor and current friend, says, "Can I have them?" And he just says yes. Did he ask you? Did he put any conditions on the transfer of the files? Did he ask you not to do or do or whatever, anything related to them?
No, he expressed no reluctance to give them to me, no conditions. It was ask and ye shall receive.
Good heavens.
He was happy to share them.
Good heavens. And then you called me and you sent them to me. And as we talked about it, I thought, here we have this record that people have been salivating over, speculating over, demanding, wondering what's in there for all these years. And all of a sudden now you've got them, I've got them. And, we talked about what to do. And you did ask me, what was it that you requested of me?
I just said, as long as he's alive, I think we ought to not spread them broadly.
Yes.
And that's based, I think, largely on the LDS Church's unwillingness to release them. Yeah. And, they've said they were going to release them, but then years have dragged on and they haven't. And I didn't want anything to hurt my relationship with James. And although I had no reason to think it would, well, that's not quite true. Although he hadn't given me any conditions, I thought it might be seen as some kind of disloyalty.
Yep.
Because I didn't tell him I wanted him and that share him. I just said I wanted to look at him.
Wow. So they fell into your hands. And in this way, unlike the Tanner episode, where apparently in Linda Cook's office, somebody found the copies and photocopied and spread them wide, basically stole the property. And then the Tanners lawfully published them. They won in court. This is very different. This is James Allen willfully and eagerly, it seems like, giving them to you. And yeah. James has passed away. And it feels to me and to you, the time has come that the world should just have them. One thing I wanted to add was when we talked about them and you'd read them, what was your reaction?
Yeah. So I'm not the historian you are when it comes to polygamy. I don't have the eye you do. And when I looked at it, all the juicy stuff about Joseph was a polygamist and you can have as many women as you want, and the secret priesthood, and even Samuel Smith claiming that Joseph had told him that if Hiram and Joseph were to go, that he would lead the church. All of that stuff had already been leaked.
Right.
So it seemed to me that all the juicy stuff was out there, and I didn't know, I couldn't see in what I read that wasn't published anything interesting or meaningful. Yeah, and I thought you might be able to.
You said to me, I don't think there's anything here. And by the way, folks, there's nothing new, sensational, controversial at all on that front. Maybe some people might look at the description of the temple ceremonies in Journal C in 1845. It doesn't describe, there's no signs and tokens, there's no in-depth discussion of the ceremonies, but merely things like groups of people would go and receive their washings and anointings and endowments, etc. Lots of discussion of that. So for those who are concerned, it doesn't divulge sensitive things that endowed Latter-day Saints are rightfully very protective of. So none of that, but none of the other. And that was what was shocking to both of us, actually. What in the world? I still am perplexed as to why in the world this was not released immediately after Ehat's notes were leaked. There's no reason why this should not have been let out. None, in my view. Would you agree?
No reason you can immediately see.
Correct. And I would like to know their answer.
There's always a motive for why.
Well, there has to be a motive, and I just don't know what it is.
I got a question for you. How much new material do you think there is in this Nauvoo William Clayton Journals that hadn't already been leaked out? I think it's 50%?
No, it's about 75%.
75% new.
Yeah, Yes. So the most comprehensive compilation was Robert Fillerup's, and what he did was combine Ehat's notes with Quinn's. Quinn had something very similar to Ehat, but for whatever reason there were slight discrepancies. So Quinn had his own, Ehat had his own, and then he went through Allen's writings, especially his biography of Clayton, and he extracted Allen's descriptions on certain days that are not included. And so what it does, it gives you a sense for what Clayton's writing, but it can't quote it because Allen, where Allen quotes Clayton's journal, he includes that. So that gives us so what Ehat had was about 22%, according to Allen. Because the reason we know that is Allen criticized George D. Smith heavily. Like it was how dare you basically publish this way. He said historians should be very skeptical using these out of context excerpts. Okay. That to me, that's an extraordinary rebuke of why Allen said the historian should not, because it removes all the context of the entries. And one of the things he said was, look, and he gave an example. He said there are entries that strengthen the relationship between Emma and Joseph. And that's absolutely true. And so he said there was about 22% roughly in what George D. Smith published. Fillerup probably adds maybe another 3-4%, and then gives an idea of what Clayton's talking about from Allen's biography. So we only had about 25% at most. The bulk of what Clayton writes, 75%, is not there. And from those entries, we learn a tremendous amount about William Clayton, about Joseph Smith, and about what the nature of the record he was keeping.
Let me share something that I had a conversation with Robert Fillerup on this subject.
You did?
And I had another one with Michael Quinn. And
okay, so wait a minute. So you're not just a fly-by-night little, I'm interested in history. You actually find ways of talking to the best of the best in the subject of Mormon history.
I just bump into a lot of people in my job.
Okay.
And I bumped into Michael Quinn at a Sunstone symposium, but I bumped into Robert Fillerup professionally. He helped me with some water rights issues. He's kind of a water right lawyer.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, in both cases, they were dismissive of the idea that William Clayton could possibly have been a prevaricator because he kept a faithful daily journal. And I mean, there was almost contempt in both cases with the idea that the William Clayton Journal might be something other than truthful and an accurate daily journal.
If they had really looked at the actual original and they had compared it to what is truly a faithful diary, his Manchester diary, a daily record that captures his innermost, most intimate, most embarrassing, if known, details of his life, if they had actually done the analysis between the two, they'd never say that. And if they'd known, and we're going to talk about this here subsequently, if they'd known that the Nauvoo Journals were not the original text and that there is evidence that the original text was a daily diary that's not extant, if they'd known that, they wouldn't say that. If they'd known there's a gap of time, the question is how long, between the original recording, between the original experience, the original recording, and the formal journal that we have today, there's a gap of time. That's incontrovertible. We know that. That's been admitted by Robin Jensen, John Turner. Okay, there's an original text that was then expanded into the formal journal. The question is how long and why. And that's the subject that's the exploration of the book that I wrote. And that's what studying the journals and understanding William Clayton and knowing his history and knowing the context, there's a tremendous amount of evidence that would refute what Quinn and Fillerup said. So, wow.
This man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. That's what my dad used to say.
You know what? That is such an appropriate end to this conversation, because that's what we're dealing with here now with this record. We have people who have entrenched opinions about a record they've never analyzed. And that's why we're doing this, is to now give people an opportunity to analyze the record and to have to wrestle with some extraordinary anomalies about this record that set it apart from a standard, typical daily diary. Anyway, McKay, thank you so much. I'm honored that you would come on the show, that you would, give the audience and the world an understanding of how we now have this incredible record. So thank you.
You bet. Nice being with you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now you know how I got them. And frankly, I kind of look at that, the way I view that is it was a miracle. That my former doctor happened to be really good friends with James Allen, the biographer, the guy that I've been studying for so many years, and my doctor friend had been studying him as well, and just had a good friendship with James Allen, and lo and behold, James was willing to give him the journals, and he was willing to call me and give me the journals, and now you get to have the journals. So I just think it's a miracle. I think it's really fun. And so I'm grateful for McKay for telling that story. And now the second question, or the third question that I get is, how do we know the journals are accurate? I've heard a lot of people speculate about, what might be in there, and what are we going to know, and what's it going to reveal? We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But how do we know they're accurate? Well, we don't actually. That's the honest truth. These are the full typescripts that James Allen made, and I make no representations that they're perfectly accurate. And we're going to have to wait and see. We can compare them to what the church will eventually release, and it might hold the church to a standard to release. I don't know. Who knows what it'll do? Maybe the church wasn't going to release all of it. I don't know, because there are some things in there they might not want out. I don't know. But I make no representations that everything is entirely accurate. However, I've heard people speculate that maybe what I have, it has certain things redacted. It has nothing redacted. It's everything James Allen typed up. And I think it's highly, highly improbable that the man who was researching William Clayton, who made a full typescript, would have purposefully altered the journal. I think that's just not possible. That he would have been really sloppy with it, I think would have been highly unlikely, simply because he was making the typescript for his own records to be able to have an accurate record for his own very important research into William Clayton. And so I think we have a high probability that what we have from James Allen is fairly, if not highly, accurate. Now, I know that there are a few things in comparing there are 57 available images on the Joseph Smith papers that we can look at from the journals themselves. And I've looked at all of them. And in those pages, there are some things, at least a few, that James Allen did not include in the typescript that I've been able to notice. And those things have to do with markings on the journal pages by certain historians like Willard Richards or Thomas Bullock. There are certain things, little editorial marks, which is interesting because the historians actually edited Clayton's journals, which is a subject in and of itself that needs to be discussed. But James wouldn't always, or Dean Jesse wouldn't always notate all of the markings, at least that we can view. And until we have access to the full images of the journals, and I really hope that will be the case. I hope that they'll release all of the images so that we can compare them and find out what that tells us. Until we have that, we can't know if James Allen, how much of that he didn't include. Some of those markings, by the way, there are some things that James Allen made note of. And so it's interesting that he didn't do all of them. But it appears to me that he was faithful in recording all of the things that Clayton wrote. And there's a slight discrepancy, at least in some respects, to a few of the things that George D. Smith released, that Robert FOLLOWUP released, and that Michael Quinn released. Remember, they had released just excerpts of the journals, about 25% of out of context excerpts. And there's one entry in particular where James Allen actually notes that there's a symbol that he puts in as a question mark, and FOLLOWUP puts it as like a backward bracket, almost like it was a squiggly backward squiggly 3. And Quinn has that as E, and George D. Smith has that as Emma. Okay. For whatever reason, James Allen didn't want to commit to it, and the others did. I don't know if Andy E. had looked at the original. I don't know if Mike Quinn looked at the original. Maybe they did. Who knows? But there's a discrepancy there, for example. So how accurate are they? I can't say, but I think it's a high probability that the substance of the journal and the words that Clayton wrote is going to be very, very accurate, with maybe just small little things that we can compare to the originals when we have them. Okay, so that's the accuracy question. The next question I got is, why, if I'm giving the journals away, why do I need to write a book? Well, that's a great question. Because these are no ordinary journals. Frankly, they're a very different kind of record. And to help me explain this, I thought I would bring on a couple people who've actually read them and have them explain to you. Sorry, they've read the book. They all also have had access to the journals, but they've read the book. And I wanted them to explain to you their impressions and why it is that they think the book's helpful, even necessary. So I want to bring on my good friends, Adam and Karen. Roll the tape.
Hi, Adam. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Jeremy.
Nice to have you guys here. I'm grateful that you're here to help on this really interesting day when the world gets to read the Clayton Journals for the first time. I've been, as part of this episode, I'm answering some questions, and one of those is, well, why did you write a book? What's the deal? I mean, you're releasing the journal, so what do people need a book to understand some journals, right? So I thought I would bring on two people who've actually read the book and ask them that question. Why the book? What is the book helpful, necessary, important to understanding this interesting record? So, well, Adam, let's start with you. Karen, what would you guys say?
Well, at the beginning of this year, I felt like that I needed to start diving back into church history. This is just my personal inspiration, and I bought all of the Joseph Smith Papers volumes, except for one of them. I still have to go buy that, but they take up a huge amount of room on my bookshelf. And so I've been going through the Joseph Smith Paper journals and reading them, and I've got an idea of who Clayton is, because he wrote Joseph Smith's journal in the Book of the Law of the Lord, which
right,
you kind of have to have some context. That being said, when you invited me to read the book, I was very confused about what the Nauvoo Journals really were. What hasn't the church released? What's in the Nauvoo Journals? And have they not released his whole set of diaries and journals, or what? And so I have to say I probably am representative of the vast majority of people who have kind of an idea who William Clayton is, but at the same time, when it comes to these Nauvoo Journals, I didn't know why they've been held back, or what they are, which ones they are, or what it means to not have the Nauvoo Journals. So I've gone from that to, at this point, I feel like I understand these journals really well, and they're complex. It's fascinating. To dive in and understand that is not an easy task, and so it took me weeks to digest that. And I feel like I could have a conversation with almost anybody about the complexities of his journals and what they are and what they're not.
Karen?
It's incredible what you've done. And I'm so glad that you've been looking at this for years, literally, and you're able to bring these out, because you would just think, oh, it's a guy's journal, let me just read it. And then you find out it is crazy town. Like you've got gaps in one of the journals. You've got overlapping entries that don't make any sense. Why did he do these 4 entries over again? And where is this coming from? They make no sense all by themselves. And you've got the actual historians who have been granted access to them saying they're super confusing. We don't know why he leapfrogs from one to the other and back, and we don't know. And they just sort of throw up their hands and go, who knows? We don't get it. I don't know why. And then they move on and then keep referring to them as like these, personal daily diaries, I guess, that he's supposed to have kept. And you're like, why would someone do these weird things if it's just a straightforward diary? That makes no sense. So, I mean, kudos to you for doing it, but like total understanding and sympathy for why no one has done this yet.
Right.
Because they're so complicated. They're so convoluted and confusing that it's like, what a task, what a daunting task. So of course you've been at this for years, because it takes that long to sort it all out.
Well, and it's not, I haven't done it alone. This has been an effort with my co-writer and research partner, Mike Hamill. Mike, you deserve just a massive, massive kudos. It's been a process of discovery for those people who watched the presentation on the Revelation. Mike and I and Rob Fotheringham were the ones who put that together. And so thank you, Karen. That's very, very kind. I'm actually really humbled, because I respect your opinion greatly, and I appreciate that. Okay. So the journals they're kind of weird, right? I mean, one of the things that I realized starting to write the book is that one of the challenges is we get hung up on the word journal. I mean, people say journal, and a lot of assumptions are made, which is odd, because journal can mean all kinds of things. You can have a newspaper called a journal. You can have a camp journal, or an office journal, or And Heber Kimball has a whole bunch of journals, for example, that are retrospective memoir histories, personal histories, and each class has a very different kind of purpose, and a source's purpose and its audience greatly affect the nature of what's conveyed, right? So whether, for example, if someone's writing right at the time, I mean, this is intuitive, but we kind of have to say it. If someone's writing right at the time, recording something right when it happens, when memory's fresh, there's no gap between, very little gap between occurrence and recording. And especially if they're writing just for themselves, that's like one of the most highly prized records, as even like a personal letter written at the time between two intimates, right? As opposed to a retrospective account that was written 10 years, 20 years, 40 years later, thinking back on the day, even if they're writing daily entries, but they're recreating it later, we just look at those differently. And so, but then we've got this strange thing that we call a journal, but it doesn't really operate like some of the other records we know that Clayton has. I mean, what have you learned about, because one of the things we cover in the book, we give a history of his record keeping, right? And Karen, you and I were talking, and I think you find part of this compelling about some of his other record keeping.
Yeah, it's important for people to understand that we're not questioning whether Clayton wrote these journals.
No,
that's not a question. We agree.
People say weird stuff. They say it's a forgery. It's not folks. It's not a forgery.
No, it doesn't appear to be a forgery.
Not at all.
So,
no.
And no one's claiming that. So yeah, of course it was him. But the difference, why these are prized so highly, like you say, is that so much weight is given to a personal daily record that you're just like you're saying, that was created in the moment. There's no memory, glitches or anything like that. And so that's why it holds such a high place of honor and trust among the historians, is because that's how it's seen. But if it's not, if it turns out that it was a later construction, then it needs to be demoted. It needs to be demoted to its proper place as a late recollection or a curated record or whatever it turns out to be. And so that's all. And it's not, this shouldn't shake anybody. It shouldn't be that big of, it shouldn't be something that needs to be argued with so badly. It's fine if it turns out to be something other than his personal daily diary. But we need to check if it is.
Well,
and so that's what you're doing, is going through and saying, would this happen in a daily diary? Would we write this way in a daily diary? These don't make sense. So yeah, the fact that we do have his daily diaries to compare this to, that's what's the cool part, is that you have Clayton's Manchester diary. Yeah, thank you, Adam. So this is a page from Clayton's Manchester diary before Nauvoo, right? And I don't think anyone appreciates, until they really get into this and study it, how tiny this thing is. Like, it's all big on your screen right now. I swear, if you have this on a phone, that's probably about the size that it is. It's the size of one of those little index books with the spiral binding on the top, the little metal spiral binding. That's a tiny little notebook. The thing is like, what is it, like 3 by 5, ish, or something like that. So the writing on this is so extraordinarily small. Anyway, this is his little diary that he kept in pencil, lots of abbreviations, just brief notes, because he didn't have a lot of room and he's trying to cram it all in. And he kept this kind of little diary in Manchester, England. He also kept one later in winter quarters after Nauvoo, and same type of thing. And so what's crazy is the JSP, the Joseph Smith Papers editors and historians in general, kind of agree that Clayton's Nauvoo journals were actually expanded from, quote, daily notes that he took, that we no longer have. And so it's like, is it too crazy to think that those daily notes were a diary like this that he probably kept in Nauvoo, just like he kept before and after?
Let's not bury the lead. Okay. The lead is the Nauvoo journals are incontrovertibly not the original text. Okay. Some people will poo-poo that and say, so what? And the way that they deal with it is to say, well, he kept, people will do this. They'll keep a day book and then they'll expand it into, into a formal journal. Of course, no problem. But Clayton's pattern was to carry around a little pocket diary. He did it in Manchester. He did it in winter quarters. The question is, if the Nauvoo journals that he kept during that period were not the original text, what was the original text? Well, we're here to tell you there is evidence, strong evidence, that suggests that he would have kept the same kind of pocket diary and that those notes were in his pocket diary. a diary he would have held on to, not inconsequential daybook kind of scribbles that he on a napkin, on a loose piece of paper he would have thrown away at the end of the day, but his real intimate recordings were in the Nauvoo Journals. No. The evidence shows that the original would have been a diary. And the question is, why then did he transfer and expand? And the JSP says he not only expanded, but he otherwise would change the original. We know that for sure. There is evidence. We explain that in the book. He would take the original, he would expand and change it. Now, that doesn't mean anything nefarious necessarily. It just means that the original is not necessarily captured exactly or faithfully. The question is, how much time elapsed between the original recording of the original diary and how much time elapsed between that and the formal journal, and why? And that's one of the big things that we explore. And there's a ton of evidence that helps us understand that. Okay, so you find that compelling. There's this pattern that gets that if we want to accept, we call it the personal daily diary model for interpreting the journals. That's how they've traditionally been interpreted. If you want to accept that, then you've got to deal with a whole lot of stuff that goes contrary to that model. And that, as you said, I think this was appropriate, Karen. You said it's left historians throwing up their hands. And even Robin Jensen said, well, it's inexplicable why the journals are written this way. Adam, is it inexplicable why the strange things happen that we've discovered about the journals?
Well, it sure seemed like it when I was first reading it, because at face value, that what you're looking at right now is the journal A1, and it looks like it's got entries for every day, or every couple of days, whatever. It looks kind of like that, but there's other things with crossover dates and overlaps that Karen kind of alluded to, and we could probably talk about that a little bit.
You want to show that chart?
This is what confused me, because when I started reading this, I'm like, well, okay, what are the journals that we haven't seen yet? I already knew those journals have, somewhat controversial stuff in them, like July 12th, 1843, Joseph Smith received a revelation on plural marriage, or whatever it says there. And it does say that. It says it.
Yeah.
But
and there's about a dozen entries that talk about Joseph having conversations with Clayton about polygamy stuff.
Yeah. And so, but the weird thing is and these journals are just strange, because they don't look like the Manchester diaries. They don't look like the Winter Quarters diaries. They don't look like anything else that he's done, except for, as I've gone through the JSP and I'm reading, the Book of the Law of the Lord, which William Clayton was the author of most of the entries for Joseph Smith in that. This journal that you saw here, and you look at the beautiful writing in it, it's really nice. He's taken his time doing this. The content and the book is quite a bit like this in the fact that it spent a lot of time on Joseph. Like a lot of time on Joseph.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. So if you take the Book of the Law of the Lord, which is Clayton kept about 6 months of Joseph's daily activities in that book. We have some of the greatest stuff from Joseph's mouth that Clayton wrote about Emma, about Hiram, about his friends. When he was in hiding and having kind of a crisis, a moment of crisis, Clayton documented those words. There's an overlap between the Book of the Law of the Lord and Journal A. If you were to basically not know which record you were reading, and you were to minimize the personal pronouns, okay, would you be able to tell which record you were reading if no one told you which was which?
Well, if you asked me what I was reading, I would think I was reading the Book of the Law of the Lord, because
you read Journal A.
Right. If I read Journal A1 especially, it sounds like, it feels like it has documents embedded in it, just like the Book of the Law of the Lord, and they're Joseph's documents, not William's.
Wait, stop there.
Yes.
So he copies Joseph's official correspondence into his journal. Okay.
Yes.
If he's doing it contemporaneously, this is highly curious. Why would you copy a governor's affidavit into your personal journal? Why would you copy Joseph's lawyer's personal correspondence with Joseph and the governor Ford? Why he copies 4 records into the Book of the Law of the Lord? He copies the same 4 into his journal, but then includes 2 correspondences in his journal that he does not include in the Book of the Law of the Lord, or subsequently the day after with Joseph Smith's journal that Willard Richards keeps. So why is he copying personal records? It's an anomaly. It's curiosity.
Yeah, it is.
So can I jump in here real quick before we lose everybody? Because a lot of people have never heard of the Book of the Law of the Lord, or they think, or they've just heard of it, but they don't know what it is. So that was a record that was kept by the scribes during Joseph's life. And it would have like tithing records, and it would have all sorts of records in it. But interspersed with those kind of records were records of what Joseph was doing every day. So it kind of doubled as Joseph's journal kept by scribes, as well as these sort of housekeeping things. So it's a very bizarre little book in itself. But what Adam's got on the screen right now is a layout of Clayton's Nauvoo journals. So what we need to explain that the Book of the Law of the Lord is not part of these. And I want to explain what these are. You see Journal A on there. And the reason I want to explain why it's divided into A1 and A2, because that looks really confusing to people. So Journal A starts in November of 1842. And the first third of it goes up to, help me out, you guys, April of 43. So it goes from November of 42 to April of 43. And then the very next entry skips 17 months and just goes straight to September of 1844. So you've got this 17-month gap. And the thing is, it's not that none of Clayton's diaries or anything had little gaps. I mean, nothing had that big a gap, but he would always explain or do these kind of catch-up entries for any dates that he missed. In this case, there's no explanation in that when he begins the second 2/3 to say why there's this crazy gap. That is, what in the world would that be about? He makes no, you would do that if you moved from one journal to another and came back. You would absolutely be like, hey, I misplaced my journal for a while, but here's, I found it again or whatever. So he starts this with this gap in it. Journal B exactly fits that 17-month gap. It starts in at April 43 and goes through to September 44, where that first one repicks up, right? So that alone is like, what in the world is going on? And again, in Journal B, there's no mention of why that is, which is crazy. And so on top of that, just to throw this in, at the end of that Journal A1, at the end of that first third, it has, again, it ends at the end of April. Well, Journal B picks up 4 days before that. So there's these 4 overlapping entries between A1 there and B. So why? If you're writing this at the time, day by day, there is no reason on this good earth why you would have these 4 overlapping entries that talk about the same things, but they're not written quite the same. It's very weird. So that's another reason why these need parsing out. You need to understand how this could happen and what's a better explanation. And then of course, Journal C, picks up where A2 ends and then goes through 1846. So it's just a really weird, that's why James Allen says it's a very strange construction and there's no clear reason why it jumps back and forth. So that's where Jeremy and Mike Hamill come in.
And Adam, what does he call Journal B?
Calls it the Gap Book.
No,
well, you call it the Gap Book.
I call it the Gap Book.
That's right.
What does Clayton call Journal B?
He calls it Book 1.
Journal 1.
He called the second book Book 1.
So this is book number 1, and then he says at the end, he says, see book number 2, and book number 2 is Journal A2, which is the second half of Journal A,
or the second 2/3. Yes,
second 2/3.
Yeah.
Right.
If your head's exploding right now, it's not your fault. Yeah, if I recall, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that what we're calling, we gave them these names A, B, C. What we're calling Journal B, which is the kind of the second one or whatever, the one that fills in the gap. Clayton called that Journal 1, right? And then he calls Journal A Book 2. So it's just like, why would that be? Why would they be kind of in the opposite order that you would expect? So anyway, right. Yeah. And your working theory is absolutely phenomenal for this. I mean, it just makes so much sense. I just want you to like lay it out, but I don't know if you're ready to do that.
We don't have time for all of it. We can give an encapsulation, but there's also something interesting. Book 1 has a strange label on it. It has an incomplete label, most likely written by William Clayton. We can see this from images of the journal, and also the JSP acknowledges that one says William Clayton's Journal 1842 to 3, not 45, but the book contains material of 45. So the question is why? So all of these things, we're not answering the questions today, folks. The book is going to answer the questions. Plus, we're going to explain that all on the show. So read the book, come on the show, watch the show. We're going to explain all this to you, and then you get to decide what you think about this record. We have a working hypothesis, a working model, And we test two interpretive models against a massive trove of evidence in the book to see how those models explain parsimoniously or not the evidence at hand. We use what's called the principle of parsimony to explain the evidence. The principle of parsimony, by the way, for the audience, is oftentimes completely bastardized. It's used incorrectly. It's people say very offhand Occam's razor, which is the principle of parsimony. It's the simplest explanation is the best. If it's the simplest, it's the best. That's not the principle of parsimony. Occam's razor states that the simplest or most reasonable answer that accounts for all the evidence and requires the fewest unsupported assumptions or theories is the best explanation. That's Occam's razor. And that's the standard by which we StillMormon the personal daily diary model to see how it accounts for 4 categories of substantial evidence. By the way, we deal with the things that are claimed as proofs that it's contemporaneous. We deal with the Kinderhook plate. We deal with the embarrassing things Clayton says about himself, or things we think are embarrassing about William Clayton. People have used that to say, well, he says embarrassing things about himself, so therefore it's candid, therefore he must have written it at the time, therefore it's trustworthy. Okay, we deal with that. We deal with pen changes throughout and what that may or may not mean. We show that those things are actually not definitive evidence either way. They don't actually fit either model. The Kinderhook plate does not. Neither does the embarrassing stuff, nor the pen changes, nor an allusion to another diary called the James Burgess diary. We deal with that. Then we deal with a whole trove of other evidence, and we test it to see how the models explain the evidence. And that's the premise of the book. There's a whole bunch of other things we could talk about. How, Karen, you brought up how the historians used it. Like, can you give us just 2 seconds on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, that has to do with who the journals are created for. It really looks like Clayton was writing these journals for the specific use of the historians who were creating the manuscript history of the church and lacked material to write that history of Joseph Smith. And so Clayton came in clutch by writing these journals for them, specifically for their use. That makes so much more sense when you look at the actual journals. They've got scribblings on them by the historians directly on Clayton's journals. Now, the historians they borrow people's journals all the time to pull information from them and put them in the manuscript history, like Parley Pratt, Wilford Woodruff. But when they got Clayton, this particular set of Clayton's journals, they didn't ever give it back to him. It wasn't borrowed. They just kept it, and they wrote right on it. Sometimes they would cross something out and put it in a different way. And I'm like, obviously, I mean, it seems clear. I don't want to say obviously, but it seems very likely that they considered these theirs to use. And so that totally backs up the theory that Clayton created these for their use.
For a different,
and that he created these from his own personal diary that he likely kept at the time, and later fleshed those notes out into these for the historians to use.
so
And all of a sudden, everything makes sense. It's very cool.
All of a sudden, everything makes sense when you have a correct model for understanding some kind of anomalies, and that model can simply explain it, can parsimoniously explain it. Then you have a better way of interpreting that evidence. And that's the premise of what we're doing here. And I love you mentioned 2 things: a permanent donation of Clayton's most precious record. Wait, what? You're telling me that William Clayton, in the prime of his life, 31, the official donation is logged in 1858. The Church Historians Press says today, they say that he donated them in 54. The church was using them by 45. We'll go over that. Might be confusing, but we'll go over all that in the book. But he donates the most important record he's ever kept, of the most important and seminal time in his life that he's ever kept. He just gives up the most private record, the most important, precious record of his time with the prophet of the restoration. He gives it and never retrieves it. Why in the world would someone, a record keeper who was blessed by Heber Kimball and Brigham Young, to be a scribe, that he would yet be a scribe in the resurrection? This man who spent his entire claim to any kind of fame or importance were the records that he kept. He kept records for others. He kept records for the church. He kept records for himself. What explains why he would give up his personal, private record about his time with Joseph Smith? That's a very important question. So you bring that up. Number 1, the donation, permanent donation, never retrieving that record.
And I want to say, of course, it's possible that he was just so altruistic that he was willing to give this up to the church historians instead of passing it to his posterity like everyone else did with their journals. But, and of course, that's a possibility.
But when did they do it? When did they give their journals over?
At their death. I mean,
At
they
their
passed it on.
death.
Like,
Wilford Woodruff
Yeah.
gave his journals, or the family did, after his death.
Right. And so they used it, the historians used it fine, and then returned it to the family. And so while of course Clayton could have donated it to the church, whatever, but this explanation makes way more sense. And also the acknowledgement by the historians that yes, it looks like he did flesh these out from daily notes. That's really important. So this makes a lot more sense of both of those, and in a very elegant way.
So if he's got daily notes in the form of a diary, he would feel okay by creating another record that he could give to the historians. Okay,
Right.
so that's just one explanation that we provide. The second one that you mentioned is the way the historians used them. Not only did they take notes in the journals, which they didn't do with Wilford Woodruff. Okay, they literally edited passages of his journals right on the pages. They also wrote, and we know this from 57, only 57 pages we have to examine. When they hopefully release the rest of it, we'll see how much, to what extent they did this. They also, in one instance, Willard Richards wrote an entirely unrelated line into his journals that gets into the church history. He was, in that instance at least, and in others, they were using Clayton's journals as a working draft. That's bizarre. They weren't respecting it as an archival property like you would. You might make archival notes, but you're not going to go in and just edit the document, okay, as though it's your property. You're going to use it as a reference, but you're not going to go in and change and actually change pronouns and change construction of sentences and add other sentences that don't belong.
Unless you know it's yours to use, because that's what it was meant for. So it's so cool. And like you say, I hope that I presume that when the church historians do come out with the Clayton journals, they've been promising that for 8 or 9 years, right? And so I presume that some of that time has been spent in scanning them. So I hope that the actual scanned images will come out for the Clayton journals, just as they've done for the Joseph Smith papers, because that's where it's really interesting, because you saw that the typescript that you are now releasing to the wild here, releasing to the public, of the Jesse Allen typescript of his journals. You've seen that they didn't note all the changes that were made because of the 57 scanned pages that are available. You have not 57 scanned, right?
There's 57 on the JSP that we can see.
Okay. And you've seen that some changes that weren't noted in the transcript. So that's interesting.
Correct.
So I'm anxious to see, I'm anxious to see the whole thing scanned in so that we can see how many more, notations by the historians are made right on top of his journals. So that'll be super interesting to see.
Yes. And I don't expect them to be wildly different from Clayton's text, but it may be different
Right.
in terms of other notations. One, I think, I think this is a good introduction to the subject. And one final thing, Adam, do you remember what percentage of Journal A1, okay, that's the time period from November 27th, 1842 to April 23rd, 1843, what percentage of that book is not about William Clayton, and who is it about?
81% of that was dedicated to Joseph Smith. Astounding.
Say that again?
81% is dedicated to Joseph Smith. Whereas you go to the Manchester Journal and it's basically 100% raw William Clayton, talking about other people as well, but it's William Clayton. It's largely about, A1 is largely about Joseph.
And that's where we started talking about, and Karen, where you rightfully interrupted us to not get the audience confused, the Book of the Law of the Lord in Journal A1. You can, if you don't know what you're reading, you will confuse Journal A1 with the Book of the Law of the Lord. You could rightfully consider Journal A1 an extension of the work that he did in the Book of the Law of the Lord. Let me repeat that. 81% of that book is dedicated to documenting the life and times and feelings and experiences of Joseph Smith, including official documentation, long polished prose, extraordinary and sometimes exquisite narrative about him. When we get to Journal B, it drops, but it's still 56% of that record in the pre-martyrdom and just aftermath of the martyrdom entries are dedicated to Joseph Smith. It is rightful to say that the main character in William Clayton's Nauvoo Journal is not William Clayton during and just after Joseph's life. The main character of his own record is Joseph. We'll leave it there. because I think that's a good cliffhanger for people to want to know more. And my gosh, you guys are awesome. I have so much appreciated your willingness to dive into this and to give me feedback. And you've given me tremendous feedback, pushback, help in the things that you have offered up in terms of opinion and analysis. So
Jeremy,
thank you guys.
can I just say that a lot of people are going to take what we say here and go, is that all you have? And we have just scratched the surface of what is in your book. The book was astounding to me to read, because I kept getting a discovery, another discovery, another discovery. And you'd go through the evidences that they had that said, oh, this means this. And you'd go and you'd analyze that. And when I first read it, I didn't realize that you and Mike have spent 2 years on this book. And anybody going into the book should be blown away at the amount of investigation, forensic historical investigation that's gone into this to find out what it is. And it's not just what we talked about. There's so much more. And they do it compiling evidence and comparing two models. And it's fascinating. So it's really easy to mock what we've said. It's really easy to mock Jeremy and this, and you should be blown away already with what we've said. But this book, holy cow, it is formidable, and it's a serious work. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much.
Amen.
I appreciate that. And I'll end on this. You mentioned two models of understanding the journals. We propose a new model for interpreting what that record is. The traditional model is that it's his daily diary. It's just his personal daily diary. We call it the PDD model, pretty simple. We propose a new understanding for the journals. We call it the LRH, the late retrospective history model, that he wrote it later for the purpose of helping church historians tell Joseph Smith's history. Nothing revolutionary, however it is, when we assess what kind of record it is. You guys, this has been really, really helpful. And I think it's going to help the audience, I think, have a desire to want to know more. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Appreciate it.
So that's why Mike and I wrote this book, because the journals need to be analyzed properly. They need proper source criticism, both external criticism and internal criticism. That work has not been fully done. And that's what we're going to be doing, discussing here, and you're going to be able to have this whole argument in your hands. And then you can decide for yourself what you think. If you believe that these journals ought to be treated as William Clayton's personal daily diary. But there's a broader issue here. And that is the Clayton journals are actually kind of part of a pattern of utilizing documents that have questionable, shaky, or no provenance, doubtful origins, and unknown nature and characteristics. There's a pattern here. And so to discuss that, I want to bring on my dear friends Michelle Stone and Whitney Horning. And those of you who remember Michelle from her show, 132 Problems, Whitney and I would go on her show from time to time and talk about these things, and we just have so much fun. And we want to talk about 3 documents that have shaky provenance and origins: the William Law Diary, the purported revelation from Joseph Smith to Newell K. Whitney at July 27th, 1842, and a Hoffman forgery, and draw parallel to what we have here with the Clayton Journals. So welcome to my friends Michelle and Whitney, and roll the tape.
Hello. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Whitney.
Hello, Jeremy. Good to see you guys.
It's great to have you here. So a lot of my audience, I think, is also part of your audience, Michelle, and loves you, Whitney. And for those who've kind of been with all of us for a while, you got to know maybe the 3 of us together because of your show, Michelle, which we've all missed tremendously. And so I'm so glad to have the 3 of you together, or the 3 of us together, to be able to talk about some things. First, Michelle, it's been a while since you've been speaking publicly, other than the brilliant presentation you gave at the Journal of Mormon Polygamy. Can you tell us a little bit about where you've been, what you've been up to?
So yeah, it has been quite a journey, quite a ride, quite a struggle, but I am very happy. I am moving and I have my housing and everything ready to go, my full docket of courses. I'm deep into coursework already. So I am getting ready to come back publicly, which I'm very happy about because I'm in a new venue, in a new setting, in a new location. And so when this plays, I will likely be starting. I mean, I'll have to figure it out. I'm not going to make new content most likely on my current platform. However, in discussion with my professors, I have some exciting things coming. I hope people will stay tuned. And then I will be putting videos back up as I can. So I'm happy to say that. So people can go ahead and look for them. And I don't know what I will have time for. That's why I can't promise new content. But I should say I can't promise new content in the immediate future. We'll see what the future holds. But I am very happy to be out from under the thumb of some really, really dark ecclesiastical abuse. I'm very, very happy to be moving on from that.
Wow. So people get access to your show again.
I hope so. That's what I'm working on. Yes.
Oh,
Mhm.
wonderful.
Yay.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Out with the old, in with the new, fresh start, new location.
What an
Yay.
exciting day. And then apparently we're going to hear more from you sometime in the near future.
Yes, I hope so. Mhm.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm
That's
really
my plan.
grateful that you're here to be able to say that. So thank you. And Whitney. So Whitney is Whitney Horning, the author of 4 books. This one, if you have not read Joseph Smith Revealed, you need to read Joseph Smith Revealed. It's an extraordinary book. It's a phenomenal encapsulation to help open minds about the argument that the general argument that we make, that the interpretation of the historical record favors interpreting Joseph as innocent of the things that he was accused of. As he said, as Emma said, as Hiram said, and I think, Whitney, we all owe you a huge debt of gratitude for it in this space, for being one of the people who really kicked this all off. So thank you. And how have you been, and what have you been up to?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Doing great. Just I have a full-time job and that's challenging every day. And then I try to fit this stuff in when I can. I love it. I love looking at the historical documents and seeing what we can learn. Maybe I love especially taking off the apologetic glasses. And I know that really upsets some people when I say that, but I did not realize how much of an apologist I was until I ventured into writing that book. And it's just really breathtaking to read everything with new eyes, the scriptures, the documents. Like, it's just is really refreshing to say, I'm going to look at this as if I'm a convert. And what do I learn from the source material? And can I make my own conclusions and my own understanding? And so I think it's just great that we have all these documents readily accessible so that we can all do that.
Fantastic. The reason I've asked you here today, because we've made this announcement that everybody gets to read the Clayton Journals and find out how boring they are, frankly. What kind of a nothing burger in terms of the sensational things people were expecting. I mean, Michelle, you've had access to them, and Whitney, you've had access to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're incredibly helpful for general research, for broader research on broader topics. So I wouldn't advise people do whatever they want. I personally have not gone through and read from day one to day with all of the overlapping days, right? I haven't read them through chronologically, but I certainly utilize them in my research, and I find them to be essential for that. For
corroboration and for triangulation with other things that are happening. They're amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we kept a great record, right? Absolutely.
One way that I think that they're incredibly important is that it's William Clayton's affidavit that is considered so important in this topic, right? And so my work that I've been doing on Helen, for example, where the William Clayton affidavit is all of a sudden the first time we get the claim that Helen, well, the first institutional claim. And so it's really useful to be able to go to his journal and say, did he know that at that point? And then also with the work that I'm doing now, like that, it's really, really useful. Just even that one document to triangulate with his journals, but then more broad topics as well. It's just an extra data point that can be very helpful.
Would you tell us, by the way, Michelle, where we can read your paper?
Yes, in fact, I think we all we all have presented at least. I know Whitney's been on 2 panels, and then Jeremy and I both have multiple papers published with, well, I guess, Jeremy, you have one. We're waiting for your second one with the Journal of Mormon Polygamy. So if you go to journalofmormonpolygamy.org, everything is up and available for free, which I think is amazing. I should have grabbed the our printed copies. They're just beautiful. It's so gratifying to see them. So yes, I have an article that I've co-wrote with Cheryl Bruno in volume 1, and then my article on Helen that is in first article on Helen. There will be more coming, and that's in volume 3. And Jeremy's article is in volume 2, I believe.
Yes, an extraordinary paper, a fantastic presentation, and I think it's so important to get context on things that people have claimed are just simply settled in terms of their interpretation, right? And that's really why I want you here, because so part of my study of the historical record has been studying the historical method and just trying to understand, how do historians do this? I'm not a historian, I'm just a researcher, but I'm trying to abide by the principles that they espouse. One of the great ones is E.H. Carr, who wrote What is History? And what he says, very simply, history is interpretation, period. It's just interpretation, meaning you've got to take all these pieces and find out how to interpret them properly. I love what John Turner said recently on Ben Park's show. He said, you don't have to be a PhD historian to do historical research. You just have to have a good imagination to be able to draw connections. Okay, that's very, very generous of him.
I could do that.
Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean it's easy, because the science, if you will, of source analysis, source criticism, and really preparing sources for historical arguments, that's very technical and detailed and requires using logic and reason and not drawing wild conclusions that can't be drawn. That's not easy. And there's a reason why we respect fantastic historians, because the work is so hard. And where we get criticized, because we get criticized for just having motivated reasoning, conspiratorial mindsets, and that we're putting pieces together that don't belong. Okay, with that preamble, what I wanted to do, there's a pattern sometimes, and it's not just in this community, it can be broad with historians in general. As I've been reading books by the greatest masters on the subject, they will chastise their own community to say things like, for example, I believe this was Louis Gottschalk who said, sometimes, either him or Robert Schaefer, sometimes once a document's been authenticated, historians lack the stamina to criticize their contents, meaning they just look at it and go, hey, this is a real document, therefore we can trust it, right? Or Louis Gottschalk says, any historical source, before it is used, it needs to be considered guilty of deceit until proven innocent. Okay, but sometimes because something is juicy, we want to use it. It was E.H. Carr who said, "Don't fetishize documents." He uses that term. He says we have a tendency to fetishize, meaning to get so tantalized by what we're reading that we then overlook things we should not overlook. So I brought you here because I want to discuss just 3 instances that are very relevant in terms of how documents have been used in historical arguments, documents that have some shaky issues, and how that kind of relates to the Clayton Journals subject, the general subject today. So, Michelle, would you introduce us to, I learned about this first from you on your show, the William Law purported diary.
Yes, this was so fascinating. And I have to say, one thing about my podcast is it really has been, I started it, in 2022, I want to say, and it really was my journey of discovery about many of these things. Because as you guys know, Whitney had to kind of really pound into me that I should approach the Joseph Smith question, because I really pushed back against it. Because I was like, I don't care what Joseph Smith did. To me, it matters what God says, But I really jumped in. And so during this process of discovery and seeing the William Law diary quoted, like it's used a lot in sort of shorts of people trying, post-Mormon shorts or even anti-Mormon shorts, right? Trying to say, bring this evidence forward. So I was fascinated by it and I saw it quoted everywhere. So I think this might have been my first time to the archive on the topic of polygamy. And I was amazed that I walked through this process, and it's held at the BYU archive, and they were going to let me come and see the William Law diary. And I was so excited to go look at a Nauvoo era document, right? I will post by the time this plays, hopefully I will have up, I think I talk about this as the last 15 minutes of one of my, maybe my first Nauvoo expositor episode, right? And so I will talk about that, and hopefully it'll be up and I share my journey. But anyway, I went and they brought me this folder and I opened it, and there was a typewritten manuscript. And I have to tell people, for anyone who doesn't know, they didn't have typewriters in 1840s Nauvoo. So I was like, what am I looking at? Why is this typewritten document held in special collections at BYU, right? So I read through it, and it takes just a few minutes. It's very short. And I had a couple of epiphanies. It was very apparently written for public consumption. This was not a daily diary. This was not a lifetime, like it did not read like someone who had a habit of keeping a journal. It read more like someone who was trying to publish something juicy and accusatory. The comparison I think that came to mind is like an unhappy spouse who starts keeping in a journal about all of the bad things their husband does or their wife does in order to prepare for the divorce. But it's not necessarily, it didn't have the ring of genuine, did you know what I mean? Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to prejudge it. I just was like, this is very clearly for public consumption. And then it was very strange that William Law, who published the Nauvoo Expositor, didn't include anything from this diary, even any of the accusations from the diary, let alone the actual diary, in the Nauvoo Expositor, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. So as I was trying to figure this out, I did the additional research, and I really have to thank Ben Park because he had an article that he was willing to send to me. I think he published it publicly, and he also had I think he posted it publicly. He also had a version of it published in a journal that he was really generously willing to share with me. So I feel bad to, but it was shocking to me to learn the history of this. So really quickly, I'm sorry if I'm taking too long, but I'll
keep going, please.
Okay, this is what amazed me. That typewritten copy is all we have. It is the closest to the original that anybody has ever seen that we know of.
If,
so this, what did you say?
If there was,
well, that's what I'm
original.
saying. That's what we have. So this is what's amazing to me. And so I hope, Jeremy, that you can post links. I think it'd be great to post Ben's
yes, fantastic article. And it's just, I love how Ben writes. He's such a great writer. And the storytelling in this blog post is fantastic.
It's really well done. Yeah. So he talks about this is Lyndon Cook. So Leonard Arrington, if people know, was the church historian for a time. Our church's funny relationship with history. Do we want to share it? Do we not? Do we want here? Let's put out the let's announce that we're putting out the Clayton Journals, but let's not do it for another 10 years after we announce it. How about that? After how many hundred of years since they were first made, right? So anyway, Arrington in Arrington's notes are some exchanges he had with, sometimes she's called Leilani, sometimes she's called Lonnie Law, who is believed to be married into the William Law family. I believe that she married, according to this, Arrington thought that her husband was, I think, a great-grandson of William Law, and that in the family there was this diary. It's all very abstract, and I spent some time just in preparing for this looking again through all of our church history records, through family search, through anything else I could find for William Law's descendants, and a Leilani Law that married into a grandson or a great-grandson or a great-great-grandson came up completely dry. That doesn't mean that she doesn't exist. It just means that we can't track her down. At least I wasn't able to. Maybe somebody more adept at this could, but I wasn't able to. So anyway, apparently there was a little bit of exchange about there being some Law family papers, but the Law family didn't want to share them, but Leilani or Lonnie, whatever her name is, wanted to. So there's this conversation with Arrington about, well, don't do anything dishonest. Like, for example, don't look at it or send me photocopies if your husband doesn't want you to. It's very funny how it comes across. And so the next thing we know, and then it disappears. And then the next thing we know, Lyndon Cook published a paper that's called, I had it here. It's about William Law, and I think Nauvoo Dissenter, maybe something like that. And he published, he used this in it. He cites it something like 14 times in that paper, which is really funny. He just cites it as Diary of William Law with no archival information, no anything, right? And then And then in 1994, he publishes a biography just called William Law, and there he shares a transcript with it. And that is the original source. Even Lyndon Cook never saw the original that we know of. All we have is this transcript. And I just,
do you remember how he cites it?
And how he cites it in his book? No, tell me.
Remind me. Transcript in private custody.
Yes, okay.
That's the only provenance, meaning origin. That's the only provenance we have for this purported diary. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so anyway, so I know that the thing that is interesting and the thing that is hard, right, for those of us who are pushing against history, and I don't hate on anybody because I understand the allure of a new document and the desire to have something, especially as they say, when it fits their narrative.
Yeah.
And that is why I argue that we need people with different narratives to keep us honest, right? It is frustrating when these documents that are so questionable, to put it nicely, are embedded into narratives to paint a narrative that is presented factually. And that's what we see happening. And then people read the narrative and just think that they know and don't even know what the source is or what it comes from or what the potential problems with it may be. That's what I think the challenge is. And we see that happening with various different sources that I think need to be. This is why I wish that there were more open back and forth discussion. I do think that academic training is valuable, obviously, because I'm turning my entire life upside down.
It's very valuable.
And so I want to that, but there really has to be an openness and an acknowledgement of the problems with the documents that we build our narratives on, and a willingness to revise those narratives based on a recognition of problematic documents and a recognition of other documents that are being brought to the table that haven't been given the due acknowledgement and credit that they should have been given due, in my opinion. It's really sad to see the William Clayton Journal, whatever that is, especially, I didn't even mention, this was right in the heart of Mark Hoffman. Like, come on, guys, and it totally fits the whatever I'm trying to say, the modus operandi, right, of how he would go about doing these things.
Yeah.
That's my hypothesis. I'm hoping to write a paper on this journey of discovery. But so we have so many problems, particularly in Mormon history, where we know that documents were changed in early Utah by the early historians, maybe in late Nauvoo, right? And then we know that we have had at least one well-known forger, and yet we are ignoring all of that and taking this very questionable typescript and using it as the foundation of entire narratives, or at least as a foundational piece, rather than saying we need to be extremely careful with that. And it really does motivate something, reveal something about bias, because people who have that perspective love it because it fits their perspective, so they just accept it. And that's where I really do think that part of the academic method is engaging with people who disagree with you, because the adversarial, I don't mean like that we should be adversaries as in fighting, but the adversarial viewpoints keep us all honest and help the academic work to be as rigorous as possible.
I love that so much.
I like that.
So just as a parenthetical to what you're saying, if you're going to use that kind of record, please at least acknowledge the challenges with it, and also the inherent contradictions with that record with other things. That record contradicts Alexander Nybar, contradicts William Law himself. In an interview with William Weil in 1887, William Weil writes in the paper, he says, Weil was his first name? Not William.
Wilhelm. Yep, he was
Wilhelm. That's right. He says, and there was a wife swapping incident. Basically, I'm paraphrasing because it's not what he said, but it's swapping wives, the swap between William and Joseph. They were going to swap Emma and Jane. And William writes back and he says, you did some pretty good history, but I got to correct something. Nothing of the kind. Nothing of the kind ever occurred.
More than that. It is. This was Law's reason for reaching out to Weil. Law reached out to Weil and said, okay, you know way more about Mormonism than I do, but this is completely wrong, right? And so and then Weil's son, I love the quote that Weil ends up interviewing both William Law and William Law's son. And it's Law's son that says, if Joseph had basically made a move on my husband's, on my father's wife, he wouldn't have started a newspaper. He would have shot his head off, right? And so I think these are important quotes to acknowledge. And interestingly, it is interesting that Law, first of all, did never publish it in the Nauvoo Expositor, his journal, and he never referenced it in that later interview or those letters that were exchanged.
And what's the controversial part? What's the controversial part in the diary? The controversial part is a struck through line that talks about Joseph seducing Jane. Okay, that's the controversial part, and that's the one they hang on about the polygamy stuff. Joseph seducing Jane. It's struck through. We don't know who struck it through. We don't know what any original said, and it contradicts what William Law and his son said, and it contradicts Alexander Nybar, whose contemporaneous record gives Joseph Smith's story that says that Jane came and threw her arms around Joseph and said, "Please seal me to you because you can't seal me to William." And they wouldn't seal Jane and William together because William had confessed to adultery. So all of that stuff is the context. And so, those things just ought to be acknowledged. That's all.
Right. And I think to push back on you a little bit.
Telling the truth. It's just
right.
contradiction should be acknowledged.
I want to push back on you just a little. I don't think that one line is the controversial part. I think the entire thing is massively controversial because it paints a narrative of Nauvoo that I think is very difficult to just accept hook, line, and sinker, and doesn't work very well. You and I have talked about Nybar. I have my questions about his account. I don't
know
accept
if it's
that
true.
one readily either. But there are these contested accounts, and Nybar is at least far more contemporaneous than this law diary that, like when you said we don't know who struck it through. Well, in my working model, whoever created the manuscript struck it through because it's so juicy. It's so like, oh my gosh, there's this admission that he hit on Jane. And then they wanted to hide it, but they didn't actually hide it, which the comparison I use is you can look at William Law's Manchester journals to see what it looks like when you want to actually hide something.
I was thinking that exactly.
Yeah, not
you
typed line with a little strike through.
You cannot see underneath those pencil etchings in William Clayton's Manchester diary. Okay.
Yeah.
That's instance number one. We plead that let's just have some balance in how we use a source. And especially if a source has zero provenance, zero. And the shakiest of all provenance in a time, and Ben Park mentions this in his blog post, he actually mentions the Hoffman connection problem, that at the very time they're looking for this, we got all these Hoffman documents, and there are hundreds of them, hundreds that they acknowledge are still out in circulation. That's just an issue. Come on, folks. Let's be careful with documents. Okay. Now there's a second one, Whitney. Actually, Michelle, you need to set this up because there's a background to how this document is. Or actually, I'm going to ask you, should we do that after Whitney explains it, or should we do it before?
Whitney explain it first. Well,
okay.
Yeah.
Explain the document first, and then Michelle, I want you to give us one example, just one of how it's used.
Okay, so there's a man named Orson F. Whitney. He was an apostle in the early 1900s. He is the grandson of Newell K. Whitney and Heber C. Kimball. So Newell K. Whitney's son, Horace, marries Heber C. Kimball's daughter, Helen Marr, and they produce Orson as their child. So Orson, early 1900s, is an apostle. He shows up with all of these Whitney family documents to Joseph F. Smith, President Smith, and gives them to him. President Smith says, I want you to write a letter to me, basically vouching for these documents, and then bring them back. So he does. So among that was a revelation dated, I believe, July 27th, 1842. The funny thing to me, I think this is actually really funny, that Orson typed it up. So when Michelle's talking about typing, right?
He types it up. Script.
And in his letter to President Smith, he says, I just typed up the relevant portion because there's other things on that document that are private family things. So the date on the typescript is April 1st, 1912. So everyone, it's an April Fool's joke. How have we missed that? I think that's so funny. I just find that funny. So he gives this revelation, right? He types it up. And what's interesting is that's the typescript is in the Joseph Smith papers, but not the closer to the original. So they admit that the actual revelation is no longer extant or available, right? It's missing. But what Orson typed up was from two documents that were they're not really sure the provenance of those, but they think they're around 1870. Those are available on the church history library catalog, and you can go see those.
Were most likely created
in the 1870s. And there's two of them, and they're both different handwriting. And what's really interesting is they look like they're from possibly a recollection of Newell K. Whitney's, because it's this supposed revelation, purported revelation, and then it goes right into that ends, and in the same exact line, Newell K. Whitney goes into saying, Elizabeth and I were rebaptized for the remission of sins the very next day in the river. And then they were confirmed again into the church, which is typically when they did rebaptisms back then, they didn't reconfirm people. So there's a story there. What's that story? Is that why Orson didn't want people to have the full document? I don't know. But in that is where they claim that the sealing ordinance was given and was first written down. It was in this document. I find it a really interesting document because Elizabeth Whitney, when she writes her reflections, doesn't mention it. I mean, this is supposedly to her husband and is supposedly giving him the instructions to seal their daughter, Sarah Ann, to Joseph. And the mother doesn't even mention it in her own
Not only does she
recollections.
not mention it, she gives an account that completely contradicts it. She has
Mhm.
Sarah being married after the July 12th, 1843, where this is a full year earlier.
Full
Yeah.
year earlier.
Mhm.
Yep. And so it's just a fascinating. You can go look at it on the Joseph Smith papers. But I suggest, so on the Joseph Smith papers, they do talk about two other documents. But what I find frustrating is that when they added them to the Joseph Smith papers, they make them look like legitimate revelations. They call them, they say that one is in Revelation book A and like one's in Revelation book B. But if you go to the, but then they do give the church history library information. So if you go look at that, those historians mark that when you go look at those, that this is probably in the 1870s. So again, it's not 1842.
Right. Let me just clarify though. It doesn't say Revelation book A or book B. It just has version A and version B because they
Right.
have these two
But
handwritten.
to be
And
somebody who's really new to all this and doesn't,
right.
they're gonna, somebody that is going to hear a Mormon historian or a Mormon apologetic, say, hey, they're in the Joseph Smith papers. Hey, that's the sealing ceremony. It's legitimate. They're going to go look at it and say, yep, there it is. Oh, wonderful. There it
Right.
is. Right. And
And
the
I
other
wanted to also say that the 1870s dating isn't actually, like, I tried to dig in deeper and try to get information about,
yeah.
can you help me understand? And there was a semi acknowledgement that there wasn't good reason to even say that. And so we really just have
don't
no
know.
information. Newell K. Whitney, Orson F. Whitney supposed these were in his grandfather's handwriting. He supposed that Newell had written them. We know that that's not the
Mhm.
case. So these are, and I believe those two documents, those two handwritten versions, were not added to the church history library at least until the 1920s. Maybe it was
Right.
after 1930, after Orson's death. So just
Yep.
the provenance of these is, again,
Very problematic.
A mystery.
It
It's a mystery.
is. And I think some great questions to ask, right? So if you're an active LDS member and you read this, some great questions to ask would be like, why does he call her SA? That's his own daughter. God knows her first name. If this is a revelation, right? Like, do we go do sealing ceremonies like that today? Like Michelle, did they say M? We're going to seal
God
M.
tells Joseph Smith to tell Newell N.K. Whitney to say to his daughter, S.A. Whitney. Yeah.
Right.
And,
So
and,
there's
and in the original revelations, this is important. In the original revelations Joseph Smith received, he uses his first name.
Newell, he does.
He uses everybody's first name. He's very
But then
personal.
another
with
great
people.
question, since this is purportedly a polygamy document, why is the ceremony say to them that they need to keep themselves for each other and none else? Like, I think God's actually intelligent and he would maybe put in polygamous language like Joseph, like Sarah Ann, you need to keep yourself for Joseph and none else, and Joseph, you need to keep yourself committed to her and all the others.
I think, okay, yeah.
I'm
It might
just
have some
saying,
kind of
right?
loophole that says anyone that he's not legally or lawfully wedded to. But yeah, it's
Well,
there are many strange elements to
yes,
this revelation.
Okay, so
very.
we have another very bizarre document that is actually, this one's used far more regularly than the William Law Diary. And Michelle, can you give us one example of someone who is respected for his arguments? Give a little background, just very brief, into who this individual is, and then the argument he makes.
Yeah, and I want to thank Rick Bennett for letting us use this clip, and I have to thank a friend who sent me this clip because I don't think I would have seen it otherwise. This was surprising to me. So Jonathan Stapley is considered a respected Mormon historian. He's written a lot of things on the temple, I know in particular. And I think, I understand. I really have been trying so hard to work well with historians. That's my goal, is to just, I don't want to be hard on anyone. I benefit so much. I know we all do benefit so much from the work of the historians who have come before. We just want to have the ability to say, hey, we need to update, we need to revise. There were some things that we really disagree with and what have been done, right? And so I don't want to be hard on anyone, but I want people to understand what we feel like we're up against, right? And so when I saw this by Jonathan Stapley, I hope that people will watch this and maybe cut a little slack to those of us who are just trying to enter this historical community and the behavior that we have been subjected to. So if you want me to play this clip, you can go ahead and add it to the screen.
Let me go ahead
And I just think this is very interesting to see how not only how these documents are represented, but how those of us who disagree on this topic are represented.
Okay. There you go.
That there's very, very little about the actual details of the ceremonies, except for
like
the
that-
sealing ceremony, which Joseph Smith wrote down in 1842. So we do have that piece.
We have the temple ceremony from 1842.
We have his sealing ceremony.
Oh, the sealing ceremony.
Yeah,
Was that a polygamous sealing ceremony?
it was. Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
See, no, I'm glad you brought that up because I noted that because there's a lot of people that say, especially Section 132 is so full of both polygamy and the sealing power.
Mhm.
There are some out there that would dispute that 132 is legitimate. Would the sealing ceremony, how similar is it to 132? And
But anyway, it definitely shares elements,
Correct.
right? So for those that might be surprised about this, the sealing ceremony is available on the Joseph Smith Papers website.
okay, is it in Joseph Smith's hand or his scribe?
It comes by way of the Whitney family.
Okay.
So the Whitney family, it was a revelation written to the Whitneys.
Can I just pause really quickly and just say, isn't it interesting how he sidesteps that question and doesn't say it's actually a typescript, which would be the appropriate answer to that question?
Mm-hmm.
Let's continue.
And it's a revelation to them, but nested within the revelation is the sealing ceremony.
Oh, okay.
And so that document stayed with the Whitney family, and it didn't make it to the church archives until the late 19th century. But scholars universally
Early 20th century, actually.
conclude that it is a valid document, a Joseph Smith document.
My guess is some skeptics would say, well, the provenance isn't very good, you can't trust it.
The people that say things like that do not have the historical training that experts have.
Okay.
To make valid conclusions. They're just not capable of it. And I know that's a harsh thing to say,
Mhm.
but it's absolutely true.
Okay.
Well, so that is what we're up against.
hmm
We let the audience judge for themselves. What from Brother State Police comments. So we have two documents with zero provenance. Zero. There's no provenance for either of these. One only a typescript. The other one a typescript plus 2 handwritten copies that don't match. By the way, the handwritten copies are different.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, some people, they want to trust it. They want to, because I think this is how I interpret it, that what E.H. Carr says, that fetishism of documents, it's just too juicy to ignore, as has been said about the William Law Diary. But there's one more. And this relates to one of the most respected historians and somebody I respect greatly, Michael Quinn, D. Michael Quinn. In his book, Mormon Hierarchy, Origins of Power, in that book, he cites a letter that purportedly from Joseph Smith to Jonathan Dunham, the Nauvoo Legion General. And that letter purportedly requested, basically demanded of Jonathan Dunham to illegally bring the Nauvoo Legion to the jail to rescue Joseph and Hiram in an illegal fashion, and that Jonathan Dunham defied that order, defied the order from Joseph Smith. This is partly, I believe, where we get the narrative that Joseph's not a martyr. He's not a martyr. He tried to have the Nauvoo Legion bust him out of jail. And he went, he was bang, 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 shooting with a 6-shooter, trying to defend himself. He's not a martyr. That's the I believe, the part of the origin story of the not a martyr motif, right? It comes from Michael Quinn. Problem is, that's a forgery. And he knew it was a forgery. Why? Because it had been acknowledged as a forgery almost a decade, 8 years before he put it in his book. And if you go to the Kindle version, at least, today, the Kindle version still contains 2 references in that section about Joseph asking Jonathan Dunham to bring the army to rescue them. It's still cited in the book. I just please pause for a moment. A Hoffman forgery is cited to make a substantial claim. That's not an insubstantial claim that Joseph was trying to get the Nauvoo Legion illegally to bust him out of jail, and that Jonathan Dunham defied him. There is no proof for that whatsoever. And on a recent interview, I won't play it, but you can go to Gospel Tangents and see the final interview that he gave with Rick Bennett. And Rick asked him, he said, so, he kind of tiptoeing around it because it's a sensitive subject. And Michael Quinn is just he's like one of the kings of the Mormon historical community. And he asked him, well, wasn't that acknowledged as a forgery? And basically, Mike Quinn's response was, well, I basically believe the substance of it. And so he used it
Which is,
anyway. And it
yeah,
remains.
which is similar to Ben's explanation for why Ben Park for why he relied so heavily on the William Law Diary, right? It's too good to ignore. It's too important.
Too juicy to
Yeah.
ignore, as he says, but it's too
Mhm.
juicy to ignore. The fetishism of documents. So that's I'm so grateful for this discussion because I'd like us to take a moment and see if we can frame how see the sausage being made. You know, the sausage of the historical argument sometimes is made with rat parts. I think
Yeah.
personally.
What I'm really hoping, I'll just state again, I just want to see there be more openness. There is so much. I don't want to. I've talked to various historians about this, and we've talked about this before. In so many of my conversations with historians, they'll start to talk about it, and then they say, "Well, I actually am not an expert on this topic, or this isn't my area of expertise. These aren't. Haven't studied the documents." So it's so, and then you'll ask who is, and they really don't know, right? So it's just this sort of group think of we all have this perspective. We all bring this perspective to the documents, right? And read the documents through this perspective, which means we ignore all of these documents and we really absorb all of these documents that are much more questionable, right? And I think that's what we are arguing for. At least that's what I'm arguing for, is can we please step back, not be so quick. Well, so I'm sorry, I jumped ahead, but a lot of these historians just rely on the consensus. They say, well, the historians who have studied it have come to this. I respect their view. I assume they know. So it's just everyone thinking everybody else knows. And then with this sort of aggressiveness of how dare you question this narrative, right? And I understand why the narrative is protected in apologetic circles, right? We really need to protect Brigham Young in their mind. I completely disagree. I don't think it serves anyone to throw, well, I guess I'm just interested in actual good historical work being done. So I don't care about the apologetic arguments. I understand them, but and then I also understand about the sort of anti-Mormon perspective of we really need to be able to blame Joseph Smith for this, right? I understand those two views. What I am confused by is the academic perspective to treat this argument like this. That's what I'm really asking for. That's why I think it's valuable to draw attention to bring attention to how these documents have been used and to just say, hey guys, this is not settled. This is not done. There's a conversation to be had. Make a little bit of room and be excited for new voices, new perspectives, new researchers coming to the table, bringing new information. I am really genuinely having a difficult time understanding why that is hard. I don't understand that.
Well, and when arguments are put forward that are substantive and that are not speculative and wild, but they actually look at documents and analyze them. The entire purpose of why I'm doing what I'm doing with the Clayton Journals is to, for the first time publicly, exercise something called external source criticism and internal. It's the actual analysis of what the source is based on what the evidence tells us. And that has never been done. It's never
and then, like you said, not losing the stamina. So we haven't done the external source criticism and then following up with the internal source criticism.
And why is that important? Because when we're using a source for a historical narrative, we have degrees of probability of its reliability. Degrees. It's not black or white. It's not on or off. Some documents have lies mixed in with truth. Others of them are wholesale forgeries. Others of them we have to parse through and see what we can find that's useful and what's not. But the wrestle is, how reliable is this source? Can we trust it or not? That is the
what portions of it, like you said.
Are there only portions we can trust? And there are methods to get there. And those methods involve a series of inquiries and really applying the logic, okay, the standards of logic and reason to those series of inquiries and being honest and fair, not misrepresenting sources, and just making sure we're systematic about it. And that's the effort I know the three of us are really interested in. We're accused all the time of cherry picking and leaving things. No, we don't dismiss any documents. We talk about all of them. We try to assess them in terms of their degrees of reliability. That's it.
And I wish that the other side could hear that. And I mean, more and more, the more that we're involved, the more I live, everything is projection. And every time that we are accused of cherry picking in this topic, I'm like, are you kidding me? Can you not see the cherry picking and the selective citation and the selective criticism and just deciding, like from the beginning, just deciding off the bat who is lying and who's telling the truth, what's reliable, what's not reliable. And imagine that everything that is that doesn't align with someone's narrative is not trustworthy. Everything that does align with it, even if it's a 1912 or a 1984 typescript, should be used. That we have to do better than, or at least we have to make room for people who disagree so we can all do better collectively. Because I'm certain, I mean, I know that looking at my podcast, I haven't gone back and watched them all, but I know I had errors. I know I had mistakes as I was coming along and learning this, right? But having the humility to be able to admit that and to update and revise is the important thing.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We're all still learning. If we all just helped each other, I love that idea, right? Like challenge us, because when somebody brings me, I was doing a presentation a couple months ago and a guest on there brought, a contemporary source that proved Hiram Smith was a polygamist. And I, said, well, let's look at that source together. And I said, well, first of all, it is not contemporary. Yes, it was in the 1800s. Well, contemporary means when they were living and he was no longer living, right? So, but it's still a nice challenge, because I like looking into those. I like it when people challenge us and say, well, what about this source? This source is definitive and it proves it. And so far in my research of years now, I'm always able to prove that source unreliable, but I still love the challenge. I love being challenged. And so I think you're exactly right, Michelle. Like, let's keep challenging each other to better and better conclusions and research and history, instead of just saying, oh, it's settled. Why are you even bothering with that?
I love that so much. Can I just add, I want to say this because I know that this is a concern for some people listening, that they assume that we are just shut down, that we have our idea set in stone, and that we came to the documents with our idea set in stone. And I know that that is not true for a single one of us here. And I would think that not any LDS person who came to this topic, right? I was a really hard sell. I came to this perspective about Joseph's, well, both, about, I believed that I was raised believing that polygamy is what we would look forward to in Zion and the celestial kingdom. And then, of course, I knew it came from Joseph Smith because we have 132 and we blah, 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 you know? So I just want to say, I constantly am going back and being like, okay, what does this mean? Joseph, what did you do? You bastard. Do you know what I mean? I mean, just in case, I don't know for sure. But I've had the same experience. The more I dig, this is what I want to tell people. The more I dig into the documents, the more the case tilts in this direction, because it just keeps showing this way. It's not that I'm setting out to try to disprove a document, but as I dig into it, I'm like, a 1980s typescript, that's what this is. That experience has been repeated time and time again. So I guess what I want to say is all of those historians questioning us and challenging us and saying we are not open-minded and we just have a bias. I want to again aim that back and say, are you historians willing to revise? Are you open? Are you willing to reconsider? Stop just accusing us of being shut down and too stuck in our mindset to consider the documents. And please look in the mirror and ask yourself that same question.
And I appreciate that so much, because all we're trying to do is advance a holistic and complete argument based on everything we have. We don't ignore the sources. What we believe is we have a better interpretation of the holistic view of the sources. For example, Whitney brought forward that Heber Kimball went to bed with Ellen Redmond. Nobody ever talked about that before. Michelle is analyzing the affidavits, and Helen Kimball, and I won't say who else, but she's doing tremendous.
I'm working hard. I'll say it. I'm working really hard on Sarah and Whitney, and it is awesome, great fun. And I have some new sources to introduce. I'm excited for this paper I'm working on now too.
You're going to love what Michelle's going to talk about. And these are important because they're things no one's talked about before. And on this show, we've talked about Augusta Cobb. We talked about the companion revelation, the problems with the D&C 132, Joseph teaching celestial marriage and the law of the celestial kingdom being in monogamy in 1835, and the problems with Fanny Elder. So we talked about a lot of this stuff. And can you talk about it's not that the other side doesn't have an argument. They do, because they have sources to back it up. We believe our argument is superior when you put it in context with the whole. But we're just making that argument. You can decide, audience and world, what you think. We're not going to stop making our argument because we believe that we have come to the right conclusions about some of it. Not all of it. A lot of it's a mystery, but some of it we believe is stronger to interpret as history's interpretation, to interpret it in a certain light based on the historical record, not based on conspiracy theory or conjecture. And so hopefully this conversation, boy, I have loved this so much. This conversation has served to advance that idea that let's please be a little bit more introspective and circumspective and careful with our use of sources, and open to what a source is and what it is not. And that's what we're going to be talking about the Clayton Journals for quite a while now. And hey, push back all you want. Make your own arguments, because you get to read the dang thing. You get to study it. Everybody can now figure out what's in there, what's not in there, and let the conversation begin.
Hey, before we end, do we want to plug our Sunstone presentations?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Whitney, please announce what we're going to be doing together.
Well, the three of us get to join together in 2 different Sunstone presentations. So on Friday, July 31st at 9 a.m., we're going to be talking about Heber C. Kimball, and The Cause I Have Embraced is the title of it. That's what he wrote in a letter to his wife.
Speaking of documents that have been underutilized, right?
Exactly. And that's what the second day is.
Look at Heber. Look at Heber. Heber.
Where there's a lot of smoke, there might be some fire.
In fact, I should save this. Can I say, Mark Tensmeyer and others, but Mark Tensmeyer has said the most explicitly that what we see about Joseph is what we would expect to see from a secret practice, right? No, what we see from Heber is what we would expect to see from a secret practice. That's exactly.
And contemporaneous evidence that is bulletproof.
And in his actual own hand.
Yes.
In his diary, in his letters, in the children he bore. So
yep,
yeah,
all of it.
So
I always think all the time, they do these DNA tests to see who are descendants of Joseph Smith, and it always comes back that they're not. And I think if the church had, just a few million to spare, why don't you DNA test all of us who come from the Nauvoo time period, right? And see how many of us are actual Heber C. Kimball descendants.
And by the way, if you want to hear a really fun discussion on just an overview of Heber Kimball, we're going to tease you with this. Heber, at his own wife's funeral in 1867, Whitney, would you tell us what he said?
Oh, well, I would like you to, because you and I always crack up over this.
This is one of the most extraordinary statements that anyone ever had the temerity to state at his own wife's funeral. He said, this is paraphrasing. He said, I love Violet because she never complained and she was fantastic. I took somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 wives, many of them unbeknownst to her.
And I have to present, I'm the total downer, the buzzkill, because for me, while we can rightfully mock and condemn Heber, I cannot stand what that did to Violet, to Helen, to all of the other women.
She was suffering, unlike the narrative goes.
Violet was the model polygamous wife. What we would expect to see Emma be, if this was the case, was what Violet was. Yeah. And the fact that she was willing to endure the suffering without complaint is what made her so worthy in his eyes and in everybody's eyes. And so while we can look at that, we also need to look at the cost of this, because for me, that is why this matters and continues to matter. Yes, we do. I mean, I care about good historical work, but the cost of this continues. And yes.
No, you're right. But I would like to say that Violet must have complained, because there are apology letters and other things like, oh, hey, still stay with me, sweetie, and lots of spiritual manipulation, right? And so I think I don't want people to come away with the idea that she was just this browbeaten woman who just endured it. I think she was very confused at her letters and his. She was confused. She's, you're telling me I have to do this. I don't want to do this anymore. Are you really sure? Okay, fine. I'll endure it. She's like, I think we would expect a normal woman to be, who is being told, who wants to gain exaltation and live with God again, and is being told, this is how you do it and you need to put up with it. But everything in her saying, I don't want to live this way. Right. So that's going to be Friday. So Saturday, August 1st at 9 a.m. is going to be Mormon polygamy documents underutilized and reinterpreted. So kind of like this same conversation today, but in a presentation there. So I hope that people come and show up and support.
That would be that would be a really good one as well, for people to understand where we're coming from and why. Because really, like the drum that we're trying to bang is, you think you know everything you need to know about this topic, but I promise you don't, right? If you think this is nailed down, and I will say that on either side, right? If you think that either side doesn't have a very robust case, you don't know enough about this yet.
This
right?
This whole narrative, I like to frame it as a true crime story.
Yeah.
It is unresolved, actually.
Yeah, it's a cold case.
Yeah, and we get to
Nice.
the end of the Netflix docuseries, true crime docuseries, and we don't know exactly what happened. That's
Mhm.
really where we are, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I
I
like to say,
Yeah.
we agree on the nature of the crime. We just disagree on the perpetrator.
on the perpetration, exactly
So
right.
come to the Heber C. Kimball, or at least hopefully we'll be able to reproduce some of those as well on some of our different channels. So people who aren't able to come to Sunstone can hear, like, let's just commit that we're going to do that. We're going to make this information available
Yes,
because
we
you
will.
need to understand Heber C. Kimball, and you need to understand the documents that have not gotten enough attention, or the documents that have not gotten enough criticism, internal and
Yeah.
external criticism. It's really important.
Wonderful. So for those of you outside of Utah and in Europe and and in Texas and in Washington, whatever, we will certainly talk about these here and on Michelle's show and in whatever forms we can. Oh my gosh, thank you guys for this incredible discussion. I think it's been really helpful. It's better than I thought it would be. So hopefully this has been helpful to you, the audience, to get a sense that this is not as simple. It's just not as simple as sometimes it's painted out to be. There's a lot more to the story, and there's a lot more to discuss. Bless you. Thank you. And please, let's all commit to do this again.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
I want to thank my friends Michelle and Whitney. That was really fun. It's fun to discuss things with them. And by the way, I want to reiterate that we are going to be at Sunstone this year, presenting at 2 panels, very, very interesting topics, and I hope you'll join us. Okay, so how do you get the journals? It's easy. Just go to StillMormon.com. I finally have a website, and just click the link at the top. It'll take you right to the page where you can get the journals. StillMormon.com, and the journals are there. So finally, I just wanted to mention that the channel, I'm rebooting the channel officially. As you could tell, for those of you who have been such tremendous supporters, you noticed I sporadically put out content before as quickly as I could. It was really difficult. Just doing it in my part time and all the research and everything. But changing the format a bit here, a lot. We're going to be putting out weekly episodes and a lot of new content. But before we get to that a little bit, I want to just do a quick recap on where we've been so far. I have been told when I started this, I've been told over and over again, there's nothing new. This is a settled issue and it's all been looked at. And can we just take a look at just a few of the things that we've talked about just on this show, not let alone what Whitney Horning and Michelle Stone and Rob Fotheringham and Gwendolyn Wine and Karen Hyatt have talked about that are new, that the Prices talked about that were new. Okay, just the things on this show that are new. First of all, did anybody ever show you before Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon, where he wrote in the margins in the section on Jacob 230? And he wrote the words "one wife" at the top of his Book of Mormon. No one has shown you that, what Joseph Smith wrote in his own Book of Mormon. And we did here on the show. I think we did the most extensive breakdown of Joseph Smith's changes to the JST. Not only what he changed, we found 15 instances of how he changed the meaning about David and Solomon, strengthening the Lord's condemnation of them, never, ever condoning their polygamy and the abominations that the Book of Mormon talks about. But we also analyzed what the Lord said to Abraham and how Abraham said he wanted to repent before he received the covenant from the Lord. That's very interesting. We talked about, for the first time, I think ever talked about publicly, that Joseph Smith was teaching about how people can be married for eternity in 1835. This is supposed to be about the same time period where he's, getting in the barn with Fanny Alger, somewhere in there, 1835, 36, 37 in that time frame. But supposedly he already knows about plural marriage. But we have a contemporaneous letter from William Phelps to his wife, Sally, where he says, I've learned the most glorious doctrines from Joseph Smith, who's preached the greatest sermons I've ever heard about marriage. And he says, I have a right to only one woman, you, Sally, in the afterlife, according to the law of the celestial kingdom. We talked about that on this show. We talked about the Cochranites. We talked about Fanny Alger. We talked about Fanny Alger, and we dispelled the myth that there is any reliable evidence that Joseph got with her in the barn and that Emma caught them. Why? Because we showed you the other side of the story with William McClellan. Who else has talked about the Ensign of Liberty and how William McClellan did not mention Miss Hill or Fanny Alger in the contemporaneous record? nor did he connect Joseph Smith to the condemnation that he gave of the 12. And this is a paper that William McClellan issued in order to support David Whitmer and completely destroy the character of Joseph Smith. It is not reasonable to believe that William McClellan would have left out his most damning evidence against Joseph Smith. What he complained about Joseph was that he considered himself king of the world. Interesting. If he had had that information from Emma in 1847, when he says he did, because that's what he told Joseph Smith III, I learned from your mother when I visited her in 1847. Well, we have the report of what the conversation was like, and all he mentions was that Emma bore testimony of the restoration. So we showed you that the William McClellan letter that's used by so many people as a reliable source is not reliable. And those people, those historians who use that without acknowledging the Ensign of Liberty are if they're ignorant of it, okay, but if they know about the Ensign of Liberty, that's a case of what we call historical malpractice. We talked about that here on the show. We gave you all of the data about Oliver Cowdery and the claims that some have made that Oliver Cowdery was rightfully excommunicated for rightfully accusing Joseph Smith of adultery. That's nonsense. He was not excommunicated only for that. He was excommunicated on 6 charges, one of which was, I believe, counterfeiting and lawsuits and all kinds of things. He never defended himself against those accusations, and he never repeated them. And he went to his grave. Who told you about the 1848 sermon that he gave where he said he bore firm testimony of Joseph Smith as the prophet of the restoration? And in 1846, when he wrote a letter to his sister, he was surprised. He said, can there be such thing as polygamy in the church? He said, I can't believe that it's being practiced in the church. And he didn't connect Joseph to it. There is no substance to the insinuations and what Oliver believed at the time. He believed something went on, a dirty, filthy, nasty scrape or affair. He believed something, but there's no substance to it. And Joseph cleared it up. And those people who've speculated that Joseph taught the High Council polygamy stuff about the, quote, girl business have no bearing for that. We showed you that there were 12 men who would have exposed him, including 4 men who were excommunicated shortly thereafter, 4 men who would be ardent polygamists and 4 men who would be opposed to it. Okay, so how are we building these narratives that he got with Fanny in the barn and Oliver caught him? Okay, let's realize there's so much more to the story, and those are the things we've been talking about here. We talked to you about all of the times before Nauvoo where Joseph spoke out against polygamy. We talked to you about the article on marriage and that he published it 4 times, and he wrote the preface to the Doctrine and Covenants that he would personally stand responsible for every principle advanced, including the article on marriage, which he had William Phelps read at the conference. The JSP says that he wasn't responsible, but that's flatly wrong because Joseph Smith published it 4 times. It was published a total of 6 times in his life that he was aware of. So we talked about the article on marriage, and we dropped a bombshell talking about the companion revelation in England. We talked about Joseph Fielding's diary and this little secret band, and we showed the correlation between William Clayton's Manchester diary and what was going on that Joseph Fielding describes with a secret little company who were receiving manifestations about who people's new companions should be, and that there was an elder C going to bed with different women and saying it was no harm to do so. We talked about that. It's the first time it's ever been talked about publicly is here, and the connections drawn between William Clayton and the Joseph Fielding Journal. We talked about Augusta Cobb, the February 4th, 1862 letter, and all of her other letters talking about how Brigham Young induced her to leave her husband and 7 children in Lynn, Massachusetts, near Boston, in the fall of 1843 to follow him because he promised her that Joseph had had a revelation about the 2 of them, a polygamy-type revelation about the 2 of them. And she said, "You've never shown it to me, and I feel so deceived." And she asked him 3 times over a decade, begging him to show her the revelation. And he never did, apparently. There's no record of him ever showing her the, quote, revelation. She followed him anyway, tragically lost a little baby along the way that she, I think, posthumously named Brigham, probably in honor of Brigham Young. She lost her baby on the trek over. And then she gets here and she says, "And you made me promise not to see Joseph alone." He isolated her from Joseph Smith. And she says, "I kept that promise. And then you said Joseph would come and seal us. And when he did not come, you went and sealed us yourself." When did you hear that before? We talked about that here. That Brigham Young performed a sealing ceremony after having isolated a woman from Joseph Smith, and he did it on his own. We don't have any records of Joseph Smith. With all the stories about him being sealed to women, there is not a single story of him performing the ceremony alone. Brigham did, according to the letter by Augusta. And also it creates a problem, as we talked about, for Augusta's affidavits. Her affidavit, Harriet Cook's affidavit, and Mary Ann Young's affidavit. Her and Harriet Cook's affidavits say that they were married together by Joseph Smith to Brigham Young, and that Brigham Young at that same time married his sister, Fanny, to Joseph. Well, Harriet's and Augusta's affidavits are directly contradictory to her February 4th, 1862 letter. They cannot both be true. Augusta's lying in one of them. The question is which one? And we talked about that here. And then we dropped the D&C 132, the Kingsbury document bombshell, where we showed the Willard Richards copy, and where Mike Hamill and Rob Fotheringham and I, where we had this insane discovery of the little notation on the back, EX as altered in pencil. If you haven't watched that, go back and watch it. I've had scholars, by the way, reach out to me on both the paper I wrote about William Clayton and the D&C 132 piece, and they said that's very important work, and I am compelled or convinced. Those are the different words I have received by that work. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend going through it. Yet to have substantive responses to that, Dan Vogel did respond to the Willard Richards one, and we're going to get to that. Dan, I'll respond to you, and I'm grateful for your response because you confirmed our findings, and I'm going to talk about that. So thank you for actually strengthening our argument. But we've talked about a lot, and now we've talked about having the Clayton Journals and how you get to have them. So that's where we've been, and where are we going? Well, where we're going. We're going to continue the timeline. We're not going to do it as regularly, but we're going to continue Joseph Smith versus polygamists, the history the historians never told you. We haven't even gotten to Nauvoo, the fun stuff. And there's a ton in there. We're going to talk about the doctoring of history. I have just started on this, and I have found 27 instances of how church historians removed Joseph Smith's opposition to polygamy out of the history, either doctored it, omitted it, changed it. Okay, 27, and I've just gotten started. We're going to have fun with that. We're going to talk about all the ways that Joseph Smith fought polygamy in 6 different categories of extensive evidence over the course of his ministry. We're going to talk about all of the years, 1841, 42, 43, and 44, up to the martyrdom. And we're going to give you the full history, the contemporaneous history of how Joseph Smith opposed this. And as we do that, we'll discuss other topics. We're going to discuss the later affidavits. We're going to discuss the various testimonies. You know, people have said things like, oh, there's hundreds and hundreds. No, there's not. There's not hundreds and hundreds of people who gave testimony to this, not firsthand. There's a few dozen, and there's 8 women, okay, who gave real testimony. There's about another 9 women who signed an affidavit. That's all there is. To be clear, there's 8 women, 9 more who signed an affidavit, didn't make any other further statements, really. And there's a few dozen people total, under 50, really, that have stuff that we got to deal with, and we got to deal with it. Yep. But when we show you the problems with the Clayton Journals, continue the problems with the Revelation story, when you take the Clayton Journals Revelation story out of which we're going to go into in depth, then these other stories are more manageable to understand, both the contemporaneous accusations and the stuff that comes much later. So we're going to go into all of that, but we're also going to do something else. We have started recording episodes, interviews with couples. First one I'm going to introduce you to is interview with my wife, because I wanted to have you meet her, and I wanted her to tell her story, because she really wants to share how this has impacted her, what this has meant to her. And I'm excited to share that with you. I think you'll really, really enjoy that. And then my wife and I are going to team up to do couples conversations. We're going to have a series of interviews talking with couples about how the polygamy issue has affected them, what it's done, what it did in their marriage for so many years, and the barriers it created and the challenges it created, and what happened when they no longer believed in it, and how that affected their marriage, and what that did in their minds and in their hearts and in their relationship. And I am so excited to share those interviews with you. We've recorded a few already, and they're powerful. And we're going to talk to experts on topics who have done deep dive research on various things. I've got some great interviews coming up with some experts who are going to enlighten me and us and this audience on really important relative topics. Also, we're going to be interviewing, and we've already started interviewing former fundamentalists. Why? Because they have the most direct experience with this. And we're going to learn from them, especially fundamentalists who've given this up, who no longer believe in the principle and what it's meant to them and how it's changed their lives. I can't wait to share these things with you. We have a lot more things that were in the works, but we're not ready to talk about them just yet. But that's the direction that we're going. And so I am so excited that you're here. I'm excited that you've been on the journey thus far. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, please go back and watch, because I will tell you, when I talk to people who said, yeah, I watched that a long time ago. Oh, I forgot about that, or I forgot about this, or I forgot about that. Go back and watch them again. I think you will be astonished at how much stuff we've covered. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for all of your support. And by the way, I should say, a lot of people over the years have asked me, how can I support you? And, for a long time, I didn't know how to answer that question. It was a volunteer part-time effort, but now I actually need your support. This show needs your support. It can't go forward in the way that it's going forward without it. And so if you want to support us, there's links in the description, Patreon, Venmo, and you can support us that way. If you want to support us in a substantial way, in a very, very, overt way, either with talents or skills or resources, you can email me at askme@stillmormon.com, and you can talk to me personally, and we can talk about that. But that's the show for today. Go get the journals, and happy reading. And remember, there's not a ton in there other than it's just, Clayton talking about a lot of stuff, but we're going to come back and we're going to teach you about them. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't, so you get notifications. Please give me a comment, send me an email, like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on Still Mormon. Thanks for stopping by.